My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just some random story. It's my life, and every word of it is burned into my memory like fire. I used to think I was the luckiest man alive. I had a wife who I believed loved me deeply, a best friend I trusted with everything, and a business I had built from the ground up with my own sweat and blood. I would wake up every morning feeling proud of the life I was living, proud that I had carved out something for myself. But life has a cruel way of teaching lessons, and betrayal has a sting that can change the very core of who you are. It all started on a day that was supposed to be one of the happiest in my life. I had just signed a contract that was going to secure the future of my company and put us in a position I had only dreamed about. I remember driving home that evening with a smile on my face, rehearsing in my mind how I would surprise my wife Sandra with the good news. I thought she would run into my arms full of joy, the way she used to in the early days of our marriage. But when I opened that front door, the world I knew collapsed before my eyes. There she was, my wife, the woman I had given everything to, the woman I worked so hard for, the one I trusted with my heart and my future, wrapped in the arms of David, my best friend, the man who stood by me at my wedding, the man I considered my brother. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't guilty. They didn't even try to explain themselves. They just stared at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was the outsider in my own home. Sandra looked me dead in the eye with a coldness I had never seen before. And she said, "Daniel, you're too simple, too weak. David is the kind of man I deserve." Those words. I can't even explain how deeply they cut me. My legs almost gave way beneath me. My chest felt like it was on fire, and my throat tightened until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, I wanted to ask her why, but the words never came out. All I could do was stare at them, like a fool who didn't recognize his own life anymore. I left the house that night. I didn't even pack a bag. I just walked out into the cold, dark street, numb and broken. My phone buzzed with messages and calls, but I couldn't look at it. My mind was a storm. In the days that followed, things only got worse. I discovered that David hadn't just stolen my wife. He had also stolen my company. He had been manipulating documents, forging signatures, and slowly tightening the noose around me while I was too blind to see it. In less than a week, everything I had worked for was gone. The company, the contracts, the trust of clients, the respect of my community, all gone. People whispered about me in the streets, laughed behind my back. I was ruined, humiliated, and alone. I can't lie to you. I thought about ending it all. I sat in my car one night, staring at the steering wheel with tears streaming down my face. The thought of never waking up again seemed easier than living with the shame. But then something inside me shifted. It was like a spark deep within my chest. If Sandra and David thought they had destroyed me, they were wrong. If they thought I was weak, then they had underestimated me for the last time. That night, as I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I swore to myself that I would rise again. Not just to rebuild my life, but to make them pay for every single tear, every sleepless night, every drop of dignity they stole from me. Revenge. That became my fuel. But I wasn't going to rush into it. No, I wasn't going to scream or beg or throw punches in the heat of the moment. I was going to be patient. My revenge was going to be quiet, calculated, and devastating. They would never see it coming until it was too late. I remember walking down the empty street that night with nothing but determination in my heart. I was no longer the same man. Something in me had died, yes, but something new was also born. A fire, a purpose, a hunger to prove to myself and to them that Daniel was not weak. And that is where my journey began. A journey that would take years, but a journey that would show them both that the man they tried to destroy was far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. But before I continue, let me pause and ask you, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below because I'd really love to know how far this story is reaching. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do so now, because what comes next, you don't want to miss it. This was only the beginning. The first step of my plan was disappearing. I knew if I stayed in that city, with everyone whispering about my downfall, I would never be able to rebuild. So I left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, and I didn't look back. I found myself in a small town, far away, where nobody knew my name and nobody cared about my past. For the first time in years, I was invisible, and that was exactly what I needed. Life was not easy. I went from being a respected businessman to taking odd jobs just to survive. I worked in warehouses during the day, cleaned offices at night, and sometimes slept in tiny rooms that smelled of dust and old paint. But with every long hour, every drop of sweat, I reminded myself this is not the end. This is preparation. Every coin I saved, every skill I learned was a weapon I would one day use. I read books on business, finance, and strategy. I studied people who had been betrayed and had risen back stronger. I surrounded myself with knowledge because knowledge was power, the kind of power David and Sandra could never take from me. Years passed and the man I used to be faded away. I grew sharper. I learned patience. I discovered the kind of strength that only pain can teach you. By the time I returned to the city, I was no longer the Daniel they once knew. I didn't walk with my head bowed anymore. I walked with purpose. My clothes were different. My confidence was different. Even the way I looked at people was different. I had built something new for myself. Wealth, connections, and influence, all under a different name. I was a ghost, moving silently, watching from the shadows. David thought he had won. He thought my name was erased, that I would never rise again. He had no idea that behind closed doors, I had been buying back shares of the company. Slowly, carefully, I acquired control until one day the time was right to make my move. I will never forget the night of that board meeting. The room was filled with executives, investors, and of course, David. Standing proudly at the head of the table, he was bragging as usual about a deal he had closed, laughing with that same arrogance that once fooled me into calling him a friend. Then the doors opened, and I walked in. For a moment, the entire room froze. Some recognized me immediately, others whispered in confusion. But David's face, oh, I will never forget the look on his face. His smile collapsed, his confidence drained, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. I stood tall, looked him straight in the eye, and announced that I was now the majority shareholder. The company that he had stolen from me, the empire he thought was his, it belonged to me again. He tried to speak, tried to argue, but the truth was undeniable. The documents were there. The signatures were there. Everything was legal. I had beaten him at his own game. From that day forward, David's downfall began. I stripped him of his position. I revealed his corruption. Clients turned against him. Investors abandoned him. And in just a matter of months, he went from being celebrated to being despised. He lost everything: the job, the respect, the power, the so-called friends who once surrounded him. And I was the one pulling the strings, watching him drown in the mess he created. But even then, even as I watched David crumble, I knew my revenge wasn't complete, because Sandra was still out there. The woman who called me weak, the woman who betrayed the vows we made before God and man, the woman who thought she had traded up by leaving me for David. She was the final piece. One evening, I attended a high-profile event, dressed in a sharp suit, surrounded by people who respected the new man I had become. And there she was, Sandra. She walked into the hall wearing a long gown, her hair perfectly styled, her face painted with expensive makeup. To everyone else, she looked like a woman who had it all. But I could see the cracks. I could see the emptiness in her eyes, the desperation behind her smile. She didn't know it yet, but I had already started pulling the ground from beneath her feet. Through my connections, I had quietly sabotaged her business ventures. Contracts she thought she secured slipped away. Investors she relied on backed out. Friends she trusted turned their backs. Slowly, she was being isolated, just the way I had once been. And watching her stand there, pretending to be strong, pretending to still be in control, I realized something. Revenge wasn't just about destroying them financially or socially. It was about making them feel the same emptiness, the same humiliation, the same pain they once made me feel. I stood at the other end of the hall, holding a glass of wine, watching her carefully. She didn't notice me at first, and that was fine. My time would come. But for now, let me pause here. Tell me, where are you watching this from right now? I want to know how far this story is reaching. Drop your location in the comments. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because what comes next will shock you. You've seen David's fall, but Sandra's day of reckoning is still to come. The final act of my revenge had to be personal. David's destruction was satisfying, but Sandra was the one who had broken me in ways no one else could. Her betrayal was the reason I had spent years rebuilding myself, sharpening myself, preparing for this very moment. And I knew that if I ended this story without facing her directly, without making her look into my eyes and see the man she called weak standing victorious, then it would never be complete. I planned carefully. I didn't want anger to control me. I wanted precision, calmness, and impact. So I invited them both, Sandra and David, to a dinner. The invitation was sent under the pretense of a business proposal. They thought a potential investor wanted to meet them. They had no idea I was the one behind it. The night of the dinner, I arrived early. I sat at the far end of the private dining room in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. The soft lights glowed against the polished wooden walls, and the silence of the room felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. My heart pounded, but not from fear. It was anticipation. Years of pain and preparation had led me to this night. Then the door opened. They walked in together, dressed like a powerful couple ready to charm their way into another deal. Sandra wore a flowing red dress that sparkled under the chandelier, and David's suit was crisp. His tie knotted perfectly. But their confidence vanished the moment they saw me. Sandra froze in her tracks, her eyes widening in shock. David's jaw tightened, and for a second, he looked like he had seen a ghost. They weren't wrong. The man sitting before them was not the Daniel they once knew. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected, and I smiled. A smile that carried years of pain, transformation, and vengeance. I invited them to sit. They hesitated, but curiosity and pride forced them into the seats across from me. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, I broke it. I told them everything. How I had rebuilt myself from nothing. How I had bought back the company behind their backs. How I had orchestrated David's downfall and watched him drown in debt and disgrace. How Sandra's business ventures had failed because of my quiet interference. Every sleepless night they had endured. Every loss they had suffered. It had all been me. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She whispered my name, but her voice cracked, like a woman realizing too late that she had destroyed the wrong man. David clenched his fists on the table, his face red with anger, but anger couldn't save him. Powerless men always turn to rage when they realize their time is over. I leaned forward and said to them, "You called me weak. You took everything from me. My wife, my best friend, my business, my dignity. You thought I would never recover. But here I am, stronger than ever, and you, both of you, are nothing." The weight of my words hung in the air. Sandra broke down in tears, her mascara running, her once proud face crumbling into shame. David slammed his fist on the table and shouted, but his voice sounded hollow, pathetic, the voice of a man who knew he had lost. I didn't need to raise my voice. My calmness was louder than any scream. I stood up from the table, buttoned my suit, and looked at them one last time. "You tried to destroy me," I said, "but you only built a stronger version of who I am. You thought betrayal would break me, but it became the fire that forged me into steel. Remember this night, remember this moment, because this is the day you finally realize Daniel was never weak." And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They sat there broken, humiliated, powerless. Exactly how they had left me years ago. That night, as I walked down the quiet street outside the restaurant, I felt lighter. Revenge wasn't just about destroying them. It was about reclaiming myself, about proving that no matter how far someone falls, if you refuse to stay down, you can rise again. Stronger, smarter, unstoppable. Today I live not as a man defined by betrayal, but as a man defined by resilience. My scars are reminders of the pain I endured, but also of the strength I gained. I don't tell this story just to boast about revenge. I tell it so that anyone listening who has been betrayed, humiliated, or left broken will know, okay, Mom, you can rise again. You can turn your pain into power. Now, let me ask you, my viewers, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story has reached. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Subscribe to this channel and join this community because life has more lessons, more stories, and more journeys to share. Never forget this. People can betray you. They can steal from you. They can laugh at you when you fall, but they can never destroy someone who refuses to stay broken.